Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to help you get your Zettelkasten on your work table beside you, absolutely the Zettelkasten of your dreams. Well, I've got kind of a fun one tonight. I didn't have any open questions, and so I was just playing around with my Zettelkasten and the amount of time that I had available. I was working through an area that I mentioned recently that I call my dump box. And it's kind of a place where I can, if an idea occurs to me and I don't want to lose sight of it, but I don't really have time to develop it, it gives me a chance to just write it down, plunk it into a section. I actually have a whole external tray that performs a number of functions, but included in those functions is a section that is my dump box. So when time permits, I like to go through those cards because if they haven't been integrated into my system, then they're not really going to be very productive of ideas. Well, this one that I ran into bumped into another task that I like to do when I have a little extra time. In my system, I have a fairly large number of cards that are just category cards. They're cards that kind of look like this one. They've just got a title and an address, and they're just, some of them are on dividers, some of them are on little index cards like this. They're just categories. And to me, these are sad because they don't really interact with anything in my system. And what's worse, when I was using these, I tended to have the feeling that, well, the category takes care of things, so I don't have to index every card. So what I ended up with was a dead category and some live cards that were cut off from the rest of the Zettelkasten by the dead category. So it was kind of a sad situation. So I like to, when I bump into these things, convert them into real cards, such as this one, that reflect my thoughts. That's something that's alive. It's the same numbering system. It's got the same number because the number's already been assigned. But then I have a job to do to go through all of the cards that are behind it in this section and make sure they're all indexed. Well, doing that, as you can imagine, is very powerful, it's enlightening, and I get so many great ideas that come out of it. For example, this one card, instead of just being a dead title, ended up with some really interesting conversations on its directory card. So very worthwhile. Well, of those two activities came together in my playtime this evening, where I was looking to file a new card and try to figure out, well, where is this card going to go? And it was rather interesting because there were two choices where that card could go. One of the choices seemed the most natural, logical, rational, had matching keywords. It just kind of seemed to fit the best in one spot. But on the other hand, there was another place in this area that I've been working in where it just wanted to go. And so it's a wonderful illustration of a rule that I've made for myself in my Zettelkasten that I adhere to firmly. And that is that my child card, the new one, gets to choose its own parent. It gets to make the choice, and it doesn't have to give me its reason. It just gets to choose. So for me, that helps stretch me out of my overly logical, overly rational, data-driven mentality and just opens me up to a more creative approach. And I have an instance of this to share with you so I can show you exactly what I mean when I'm saying that a child card gets to choose its parent. And I hope you'll get the feeling that you will grok why that card picked the parent that it chose. So come on over to the down-facing camera and have some fun. So here's a card that went into my dump box a couple of days ago. And it was a philosophy card that actually shows up in my November newsletter, which is going to the printer tomorrow. And it's the notion that A Zettelkasten, it's how a Zettelkasten actually works when you're doing, especially when you're doing an analog Zettelkasten where you're writing the cards out by hand. There's something about the hand-mind connection that you actually create mental space in your brain for that card. And when you also create the tagline that captures in a small space the meaning of that card, then what happens is that those cards themselves become building blocks for thoughts. And that's the concept of this card that I wanted to capture. So where is it going to go? Well, it's about a Zettelkasten, and as you can imagine, I have a fairly decent size, like half a drawer, 3/4 of a drawer of cards that are directly related to a Zettelkasten. So the logical choice would be something in that area. And I have a perfectly good parent card for this card that basically part of the joy of a Zettelkasten is what I call the pop off the page moment of insight, when suddenly, whoa, everything comes together and you just have this joy experience that, oh man, I get it. This is a sudden insight. Well, and this relates to it because the insight probably comes about because of the cards being building blocks. So it's very, very rational for this card to choose this card as its parent, and there wouldn't be any problem in making that choice. But this card had a different area that it wanted to go in, and I didn't have a keyword match, but I sure had an area in mind. Well, how did I have an area in mind? It's that section that I've been working on cleaning up, the one that began life just being called intellectual sloth and then got expanded into a more positive direction. We must be ready to see and to ask questions, which is the opposite of intellectual sloth. Instead of saying, oh, don't have intellectual sloth, let's have its opposite. And when I did that and started working with that directory, I ended up with some amazing questions came up to create a fabulous conversation around this whole idea of seeing and asking questions. And here are all of the conversations that came directly off of this card. Now, for some reason, this card wanted to be in this area. Do you see the word question anywhere? Do you see the word see? I don't. But this card wanted to be in this area. And it kind of really, really wanted, and in fact, it was this last one, embrace your questions as power tools, that this card was really attracted to. And here it is. It's a Julianne Scherer quote. So how do you encourage a viewer to embrace their questions as power tools? And my response was that Alder says that an undemanding reader asks no questions and gets no answers. So my tagline was Julianne and Adler, embrace your questions as power tools. And this card here wanted to join this conversation. Embrace your questions as power tools. Your Zettelkasten cards are building blocks for novel thoughts. It's all based on a feeling. There are no matching keywords. And yet this card really, really wants to tuck in here. What do you think? Would that be where you would feel that you wanted to place it? Or would you feel that it went better here? Part of the joy of a Zettelkasten is that pop off the page moment of insight. Well, this one definitely applies, and so there's no two ways about it. I'll be expanding its conversation card to include this new card as well. But the child always gets to choose its parent, so it gets installed in my Zettelkasten as 1M4B-4A. But because of the power of links, it also gets to participate with this conversation where it is a very natural fit while maintaining its main location as more of a speculative conversation with this quote from Julianne Scherer. Now there's work yet to be done. I've got to identify the key words that I want to index and index that card, but I think it found its home. So where would that card have gone if those cards were in your Zettelkasten? Would you have gone with the logic or would you have gone with the feelings? I don't know. I'm really liking the contribution that it makes to the whole idea of questions as power tools because in a way, when we have our Zettelkasten cards living in our brains, we actually start reasoning with those cards even when we're not near our drawers. We could be driving down the highway and our mind can be working on cards that it knows so well because of those taglines and because of the fact that we index those taglines under each of the key words, so we really know these cards intimately. And that gives them function in our brains, much as the pianist who knows the keys of the piano so spectacularly that they only have to think a note and the hands go to the place. There's no necessity to say, oh, I want the G above middle C, okay, da, 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 which would be impossibly slow. Likewise, we don't necessarily have to go to our Zettelkastens and pull out drawers and thumb through cards to make associations. And in fact, my index search sent this card to the place where it only linked to ultimately. It's just a link to the place where it logically goes. It physically goes where it's going to have the most fun. That's at least a very good measure of the value of a Zettelkasten. They're fun. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.